Hello and welcome back to another VMK in the game development series. In this VMK we're going to continue working with the console window, and this time adding the ability to display text inside the window itself. So let's just jump right in. Last time we left off by having our console window showing up on the screen. When we press tab it appears, when we press tab again it goes and disappears. Well, now what we want to do is we want to add some text into here so that when we enable the console window we can see some text on the screen. This is relatively easy to do. Let's say we wanted to display the number of frames per second inside of the console window. To do this, we would need to override our handle keyboard function. In here, we have all the different keys that could be pressed, and if they are, we go and call specific functions. Let's say, for instance, when the console window is open, if you press the F key, then the number of frames per second will be displayed on the screen. Well, we can do this. However, with the current layout, what this would do is it would also turn the flashlight on and off. We don't want this. So we need to create a mechanism so that when the console is open, keyboard presses are handled discreetly, but when the console is closed, then all this other stuff is handled the way it was before. To achieve this, we need to know whether the console window is open or closed from within the game OpenGL class. The easiest way to do this is to create a function that we can call to test to see if the console window is open. So let's go ahead and do that. Inside of scene, let's see here, scene.cpp and scene.h, we need to create a new function here. This function is going to return a boolean, so it's going to return true if the console window is open and false if the console window is closed. The way we determine whether the console window is open, we look at the following. We return true if the console is open, and if the console is opening, it is considered to be open. If the console is closing, it is considered to be closed. So in other words, we check to see whether the console parameter's y value is less than the max, and if it's moving downward. If this is the case, then we consider that the console is open, so we return true. All other conditions we return false, indicating that the console is actually closed. Now, from within game OpenGL class, inside of the handle keyboard function, we can do the following. We check to see if the console window is open. If it is, we'll go and do whatever we want to do here. Otherwise, we're going to do whatever was listed down here. So let's take a look in here. So if our console is open and we press the F key, then immediately we set the F value to be false, and we call a function called frames per second toggle display. We still have to implement this, but basically what this is going to do is toggle the display on and off. Now notice the way that I've handled this F key. This is actually a way better way to handle key presses than what I did down here before earlier. So I would highly recommend to get rid of this code unless you really like it, but it's not very good when working with a pure game engine. Really, I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote this code, to tell you the truth. So let's rewrite this to be the proper way to handle the F key. We'll just take this out and replace it with the following. So if the key is pressed, we immediately set it to be false, and then we go and toggle the headlight. We're not going to go back into this if statement a second time while the key is still being pressed, because the event that causes this variable here to be true gets only called once. Inside the message handler, you'll see when we press the key downward, then we set it to true. But it's not going to reset itself to be true a second time around until key up is released. So really, this is the way we should be handling key presses inside of the game engine. Where were we here? Handle keyboard. So if we have the console open, we're going to toggle the display. If the console is closed and we press the F key, then we're going to toggle the headlight. Now let's go and implement this frames per second toggle display function. Down here we're going to create the function declaration, and inside of the CPP file, where should we put this? Let's put it right underneath toggle to console. All we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called BFPS, which is a boolean that indicates whether we want to display frames per second or not, and we're going to toggle them using the negate operator. So we take the current value, negate it, and save it back to itself. Now we need to use this variable inside of the render function so that we render the text to the screen. But before we do that, I guess we should go in and actually define that new variable. So right here, we're going to create a new variable. It's a boolean that contains whether we display the frames per second or not, and by default we're going to set this up to be false. Now I need a way to get the number of frames per second out of the game OpenGL class and into scene.cpp. Scene.cpp is responsible for rendering our console as well as our HUD and everything else, so we need to be able to have the frames per second values here. However, the calculations for the frames per second happens inside game OpenGL. To pass this value to the scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our user settings class. Inside user settings, let's open this guy up. What we're going to do is create a pointer to our variable within game OpenGL. Then from our scene, we can use our user settings class to see whatever value the pointer is pointing to. So down inside the private section, we're going to add actually two pointers. One pointer for the total game time and another pointer to the frames per second. We're going to need a function to set these pointers as well as to get values from these pointers. So the first function we're going to define, I'll put it right here underneath the destructor, is going to be called setPointers, and we're going to set the pointer to our time game and to our frames per second. And we're also going to create two other functions to retrieve these two values independently. So I'm going to put those in line down here. First one is going to return the value of this pointer's 0 index, and we're going to cast it to be a floating point number because we want to return a float. So that's what it's going to return. And then the frames per second, we're going to get the value at index 0 for this pointer, again, cast it to a float, and then we return. We need to go and implement the getPointers function, or setPointers function, inside of the CPP, and we'll do that like so. We pass in two pointers, a pointer to a double and a pointer to a float, and we're just setting these directly into our member variables. Let's compile this, make sure everything's okay. Now, in here, after we've set up our pointer to our user settings, we need to now define what those pointers are for the frames per second and the game time. So we can do this. Set pointers, and we want to pass in the pointer to the game time, and inside game OpenGL this value is saved right here. So all we need to do is get the address of m_d time game. Oh, that's an ampersand sign there to get the address, and the second parameter was the address of the frames per second. So now we have access to the frames per second as well as the game time from within user settings through the use of our accessor functions, which were get frames per second and get game time. Now we need to decide when to display the frames per second. We have this variable here that indicates when we want to display it. If it's true, we do. If it's false, we don't want to. But we need to write into our code somewhere the function that uses this variable. So we're going to do that inside of the HUD. I want to have the frames per second on the screen independent of whether the console is on the screen or not. But I want to only be able to turn the frames per second on or off if the console screen is turned on. what we're going to do is right here, make an if statement. If the frames per second counter says true, then we want to display the frames per second. So we're going to call print text. We're going to indicate we're using the font number 1, and the location of the text is going to be located at the right-hand side of the screen. So we take the width of the current screen, we subtract 100, so we move 100 pixels away from the right-hand side, and the vertical direction is going to be located at the height of the window minus 18, so a little bit down from the top. We're going to specify we're going to use black text, size 1, and it's going to show frames per second and then a value. And the value we get from MP user settings, and we call that function getFramesPerSecond. So that's going to achieve what we need, but before we can go and run this, we need to go in and make sure we load in a font so that we have an ID of 1. Inside initialize here, or just scroll down here under the load font section, we'll add the following. You've seen this code before, so I won't go into it in any detail, but basically we're loading a font that's been saved here under resources fonts, smallfont.tga. I created this smallfont.tga file using the application that you can find inside of the store, Font Image Generator. You can use this to quickly make any kind of font that you like that you've loaded already inside Windows. So using the graphical user interface, I quickly put together a font, exported it, and saved it inside the resources fonts directory. Okay, let's go and compile this and see if we can get it to run. Okay, if I open up the tab, we see nothing on the screen, but if I press the F key, you notice that immediately the frames per second appears on the screen. An interesting thing happened there was the console disappeared as soon as I pressed the F key. If I press it again, I can toggle the frames per second, but I don't seem to get the console back on the screen. So there's a bug somewhere in our code. Let's go and try to figure out what's wrong with it. Let's begin by looking inside of the console render function. This looks okay. Actually, let's go into the HUD. Let's see what happens if we flip these the other way around. Okay, console opens. I press the F key, still disappears, and then if I press F, the console's still active, it's just not displaying on the screen. I have a feeling that there's a bug inside of the print text because everything was working up until we implemented this. Let's go take a look deep into here. Ah, okay. We're setting the model view matrix to identity here, but we never reset anything. Let's go and reset it after we change it. So here we're going to specify we're going to be manipulating the model view matrix. We're going to push that onto a stack, and then after we've finished working with it, we're going to pop it back. Like so. Oh, there's another thing here. We're enabling GL texture 2D, but if we scroll down here, we don't disable it at the end. So we have to make sure we disable it at the end as well, or else when we go and render something, it's going to be expecting us to have texture coordinates, but we don't actually have any. So that's probably the true mistake in this code. Let's go and build this. Alright, console open, console close. Press the F key, there we go, and press the console button again. Alright, so we're missing that disable call, which meant that our renderer for the console was requiring texture coordinates, but we didn't actually have any, so it's corrupting everything. But now that we've added that disable, everything seems to be working fine. Now notice something else. When we have the console open, we can move around on the screen, and we have the frames per second counter. As soon as I press the console button, if I press any of the keys to move around, you don't actually move. But I can still look around using the mouse. I haven't overridden the mouse look commands when the console's open, so you're still able to look even though you're not able to move. You can go and change that if you want. It's only a matter of changing one if statement inside of the handle mouse commands. And if we press the F key, we can turn on and off the frames per second counter. If you leave it on, then you can see it. If you turn it off, then obviously it disappears. So that works well. Now let me show you how to do one other thing in this video. Let's say you wanted to have some text that is actually attached to the console window. So as the console window scrolls down, the text scrolls down with it so that you can see data in there. To achieve this, we need to go and modify our console renderer function. Where is it? Console render. First we're going to render our rectangle, so the yellow area and then the white area, and then underneath that we're going to have our text. So this is how we can do it. I'm going to create 5 lines of text that are going to work with the console window. On the top line, which I call here line 5, where I'm going to specify the current game time. Then line 4, line 3, line 2, and line 1. Line 1 is going to be the very bottom one, which is going to sit inside of that white section where the user is going to be able to type in commands. We're not going to handle this in this video, but we will come back to it. I think it's in the next video. Each line of text is 16 pixels tall, and here's the code to actually output the text to the screen. So the first one is actually line 1, and I'm just going to have the 2 little greater than signs showing up on the screen. Then the next one I'm going to show output. Next one is going to be line 3, line 4, and then the top one is going to be game time %F, and I'm going to pull the game time out of the pointer that has the value stored for us. So let's go and compile this, run it, and see what happens. Okay, so if I press the tab key, you'll notice now we have 2 little greater than signs in the white region, and then we have output line 3, line 4, and then the game time. And the game time will always be incrementing because as our game is running, our time is incrementing. And this is the actual true game time in seconds since the beginning of the game. If our console window is a little bit too tall, I mean, it looks like I could fit an extra line of text up there, then you can also modify your code so that you make it smaller. The height of our console window is controlled inside scene.h, so if we wanted to change the height, we can just go in here and, for instance, change it from 100 to 80, and if we were to run it now, we should see our console window shorter. Like so. So there we go. Basically, we got the ability to display text inside of our console window, and we also been able to override keyboard presses so that we can cause things to show up on the screen just by having the console window open. If you press the F key when the console window is closed, you're still using your flashlight the same as you did before. You can toggle the headlight, but if we turn the console on and press the F key, then we're toggling the frames per second. Alright. So that's it for this video, and in the next video we're going to be looking at how to get text from the keyboard and actually display it on the screen as you're typing. You'll notice now when you press the F key, nothing actually appears inside the console window. Well, in the next video we're going to be able to echo out everything that you're pressing on the keyboard to the screen.